If someone invades your space, you ask him to leave. He stabs you in the head and leg. What would you do? Hi everyone, welcome. My case today is the story of the trending story of the herdsman versus farmer. On the 7th of March, the Supreme Court of Nigeria ruled that the farmer, in this case, deserved the death sentence. The death penalty is what the farmer got. Okay, let's talk about this case. Let's analyze it. Let's unpack it a little bit. Let's see what the prosecution presented as their evidence. Let's see what the defense presented as well. Let's look at what the Supreme Court considered to give the farmer a death sentence. Was the ruling right? Was it correct? Let's also look at what the critics are saying. And I'll unpack all of this, and I'll also tell you what I think about this case. So the background to this case is that the herdsman went with his cows to the farmer's land. He was grazing and went to the land. Whilst he was on the land, he asked the farmer, did you see the people who rushed in here or anyone who rushed onto your land? And the farmer said no. Then the farmer proceeded to ask the cows to move off his land. The herdsman, clearly displeased with the fact that the farmer had asked the cows to leave his land, he launched with a knife at the farmer, and the farmer ran. He was shouting, calling for people's attention, but nobody responded. In the process, the herdsman stabbed the farmer on the back of the head, and he also stabbed him on his left leg. A scuffle ensued, and the farmer overpowered the herdsman, took the knife from him, and stabbed him. Some reports say he stabbed him twice on the neck, some say 3 times. Anyway, the bottom line is that the farmer stabbed the herdsman on the neck. On stabbing him on the neck, the herdsman died. Now, he was arrested. The farmer was arrested by the police. So we're going to look at what transpired from the point of that arrest, all the way down to the Supreme Court ruling. So let's unpack this a bit more. This case happened in 2015. We're currently in 2025. So let's take it from the point of the arrest. When he was arrested, the farmer was arrested, at the police station, and the police questioned or took a confession from him. Now, before the confession was taken from the farmer, he was cautioned. Under caution, the police officer cautioned him in English and then cautioned him in Hausa. And the farmer said he understood, and he signed that he understood. The police officer countersigned. Then the police officer took a statement, which was the farmer's confession. On taking the confession statement, the police officer repeated it to him in English, then in Hausa. He translated it in Hausa, of which the farmer said, yes, he understood, and he signed. The police officer then countersigned too. So, from that point, let's look a bit more about the prosecution case here. What was presented in court? What did the prosecution present to the Supreme Court that made the Supreme Court rule the death penalty for this farmer? The prosecution relied on 3 key points. The first one that was relied on by the prosecution was the farmer's confession statement that was taken by the police officer at the police station. The second point that was relied on by the prosecution was the fact that he was cautioned, also at the police station. The third point that the prosecution relied on was the medical evidence given by the coroner who observed the dead body of the herdsman. Now, following on from this, let's look at what the defense argued. The defense, on the other note, at first, they refused for the caution statement, the confession statement, to be allowed in court. And then they allowed it. They decided to allow it. Now, the second thing that they relied on heavily was self-defense in this case. So we're going to unpack this a bit more. I'm just building the story up for you. As it's building up, I will analyze a bit more about what the Supreme Court's decision entailed, what critics are saying, as I said, and I would give my opinion. And I would also like to hear your opinion too. What do you think about this case? So far, so good. Of everything I have mentioned, tell us your thoughts. Talk about it in the comment section. We will look through them and I can talk about it in my next video. So, the Supreme Court's ruling. Let's look at what it entailed. What did they decide? What did they consider in this case? What did they take into account? I'll read some points out to you because some points that I made, and I think it's worth reading these things out to you so you can have your own informed decision. And we can talk about it in the comment section. We can go back and forth to see what you think about this case regarding the Supreme Court's ruling. The Supreme Court ruled that this case, the prosecution in this case, needed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the farmer killed the herdsman. So there must be no doubt that his actions caused the death of the herdsman. And they said that the prosecution needed to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the death of a person actually occurred, which we all know, yes, somebody died. The farmer stabbed the herdsman back and the herdsman died. That the death was caused by the accused. Yes, again, it's not in question. Yes, the death was caused by the farmer as a result of the stabbing. The Supreme Court ruled that beyond a reasonable doubt, the prosecution needed to prove that the act was done with the intention of causing death or done with the intention of causing injury, as the accused knew or had reason to know that death would be the probable and not only the likely consequence of his act, or the accused knew or had reason to know that death would be a likely consequence of any body injuries which the act was intended to cause. Okay, let's take it a bit further. Let's analyze a bit more, because they gave a decision. After the ruling they gave to the prosecution and the entire court, they gave a decision in this case. And the decision that the Supreme Court gave, well, they considered the evidence presented by the medical officer. I'm reading this out to you again. And the police statement that was taken. And considering these two factors, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the prosecution. Now, regarding whether the defendants can be acquitted, if you remember, the defense presented an argument saying it was self-defense. But the decision from the Supreme Court was that regarding whether the defendant can be acquitted through his plea of self-defense, the court ruled that as he had the opportunity to disarm the herdsman of the knife, he had the opportunity to escape from the scene or throw away the knife, far from the reach of either of them. This was the Supreme Court's decision. Okay, I forgot to mention a point here. One of the Supreme Court's ruling, one of the things they ruled on was that they used the case of Adamu versus State. In the case of Adamu versus the state, the Supreme Court, and I have to paraphrase this just to simplify it, the Supreme Court ruled that in a case where a confession has been made, the court can safely rely upon that confession if it was given voluntarily. If the confession was given by an individual voluntarily, then it can solely be relied upon to secure a conviction. Okay, I guess I've outlined the ruling of the Supreme Court thus far. So let's look at what some critics are saying about this case.
This is really a sad day, I think, for Nigerians and their rights to self-defense. Nigerians already have to provide their own security, electricity, infrastructure, and now they can't even defend themselves without being sentenced to death. And I think all of us should be very alarmed by this very unfortunate precedent. In February of 2021, we read in the news about Jackson's death sentence just as we were coming into Nigeria. So we flew to Yola, and I met with his counsel. He was so poor that it was legal aid counsel that helped him. And so I looked through a copy of the judgment, and on the spot, in that initial review, I saw that there was a 167-day lapse between the close of arguments and the judgment. Now, our Constitution specifically says it has to be within 90 days. Now, the legal aid counsel hadn't even found it. That shows you the quality of representation that he had or lack thereof. So Mr. Jackson has been failed at every possible level by the system.
Regarding what the critics are saying that Sunday Jackson, and that's the name of the farmer who killed the herdsman, is 30. He's a young man who has been detained since 2015. He came before a lower court in 2021. And it was the lower court who found him guilty of murder. That ruling is what the Supreme Court has now upheld. It was upheld on the 7th of March as yes, guilty of murder. Critics are also saying that in this case, there was a delay to bring his case to judgment, a delay of 160 days instead of 167 to be precise, instead of 90 days. Critics are also saying that it was self-defense, that he had a right to defend himself on his property, on his land. Take a look.
And the issue where this man was out farming, minding his own business, and then the attacker came and a struggle ensued. And of course, this man is going to defend himself. That's why we call it self-defense.
What do you think about this case? I want to hear from you. And I'm going to give you my opinion, because for me, this case is rather disturbing. I wonder about one's human rights, the right to be able to defend your space when your space is invaded. So let's look a bit further about certain points in this case. The Supreme Court ruled to the prosecution that this case, they needed to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reason, there must be no doubt that what Sunday Jackson did accrued to the murder of the herdsman. But there are some doubts though. Well, at least I feel there's some doubts. Because when you look at the confession that was taken by the police officer, was this confession taken under duress? From the facts of the case that I saw, I didn't see that these things were analyzed properly. How was this confession taken? Was it done under duress? Did Sunday Jackson, the farmer, confess because he felt pressured? Yes, he signed, he put his signature on it, the police countersigned, but was it done under duress? We have to think about these things. We have to look at these things from this perspective. Now let's look at another point. The statement taken from the police. How was this statement taken? Remember, the Supreme Court said beyond a reasonable doubt. Already the confession, for me, creates some doubts because I don't know if the confession was taken under duress and it wasn't checked. Nobody checked or analyzed how this confession was taken. How was the statement of this confession taken by the police? Was another witness there? From the evidence I saw, it was just the police officer and Sunday Jackson. So who else? Sunday Jackson is entitled to at least a representative, somebody to be there when the statement was being taken. Reasonable doubt. Another thing I want to point out is self-defense. Now, the self-defense argument Does Sunday Jackson not have the right to defend his own property? I'm going to read, there's a case I made a note of, and I'm going to talk about it here. In the UK, there was a case that divided the country some years ago. It was 2000, the year 2000 to be precise. This was the case of Tony Martins. In this case, two young men invaded the house or the home of Tony Martin. Sorry if I said Tony Jackson, it's Tony Martin. They invaded his home not knowing Tony Martin was at home. Now, when Tony Martin was upstairs, when they broke into his house with the intention of going to steal some of his property, Tony Martin, on finding out that he could hear someone was in his property, took his gun, chased after the young men. One of the young men fled through the window, an open window. The other young boy was attempting to flee through the same window, and was shot by Tony Martin. In the process of him being shot, he died. Now, this case divided the nation because the issue of rights to defend your property came up. He was convicted of murder, but his conviction was downgraded to manslaughter on the condition, or based on the fact of diminished responsibility. The court argued that in Tony Martin's case, his state of mind at the time, prior to him shooting the young boy who died, his state of mind was not okay. His mental capacity at the time wasn't okay. They said it was diminished responsibility. So I wonder, in the case of Sunday Jackson, which slightly mirrors this case, what was Sunday Jackson's state of mind? Was there diminished responsibility? Could he have lost control? Particularly because the herdsman came at him with a knife and stabbed him at the back of his head whilst he was fleeing, bear in mind. And then the herdsman also stabbed him on the left leg. In a situation like that, what was his state of mind? I'm sure he feared for his life. He ran, he fled, he was afraid. He probably assumed, if I don't do what I need to do, I would lose my life in the course of this altercation. Nigerian law mirrors UK common law in a lot of respects. So I'll talk about the issue of caution again. The police cautioned Sunday Jackson, the farmer. What was this caution? Was he read his rights? How was he cautioned? What was said as per this caution? These are some of the things we need to know. In the area of self-defense, because these are the things that create reasonable doubt. In the area of self-defense, the Supreme Court ruled that that's the farmer, I read this before and I'm going to read it again because this is an analysis. The court ruled that as he had the opportunity to disarm, the farmer had the opportunity to disarm the herdsman of the knife, he had the opportunity to escape from the scene of the crime or throw away the knife far from the reach of either party. How is this possible though? Did anybody analyze the scene of the crime? Was evidence taken? Was anything captured or gathered at the scene of the crime? How do we know how this scuffle took place? Was the farmer on the floor? Was he was fleeing when he took the knife off of the herdsman? So what was the involvement? What did the scuffle entail? Because when you think about it, he was stabbed in the leg. So someone who is stabbed in the leg, was he able to flee the crime scene? Was he actually able to run for his life? We don't even know if he was on the floor. Where was the farmer at this point in time? From the evidence I saw, it wasn't mentioned. Who analyzed the crime scene to let us know the scuffle, what the scuffle entailed? I didn't see any of this. The young man was detained since 2015, precisely 10 years of his life. If someone invades your space, you ask him to leave. He takes a knife and attacks you in the head and leg. What would you do? We urge the Nigerian judiciary to review this case. Take a look at this case again. It's unfortunate that the herdsman died in the process of this altercation, but Sunday Jackson has been detained for 10 years. At best, this should be a case of manslaughter.
As a human rights advocate and as a pastor, I'm here to advocate for this man who was totally innocent. So it has international implications. The eyes of human rights advocates are now on Nigeria. Like, how could this happen? How could this possibly happen? By anyone's estimation, as Barrister said earlier, manslaughter at least, because murder one that he's being convicted of and may face hanging if we can't get clemency for him, it has to be premeditated. So what?
And it should be thrown out. He should be free because he's done 10 years already. If you like our content, like, share, subscribe. Till next time, take care of yourself and each other.